Okay, so this is the Programming Tips and Talks series, and this is the first episode. I'm kind of winging it, but we're going to be going over naming conventions. Um, Good practices, really, is what it's about. So, the first thing I want to talk about is acceptable word abbreviations. Temp, ID, UI, OI, or IO, stat or stats or pin. Those are acceptable. Um, you want to make sure if you want to know if a word should be abbreviated or not, basically think about, do you say it that way in common language? You say stat, you say stats, you say pin, you say ID. You don't expect someone to put identification. That's ridiculous. And even temp is okay because you don't always say temporary. You might just say temp, like a temp agent or person or employee, temp employee. Um, and so those are okay. You don't want to put all these abbreviations like you may say, okay, hour is HR, and maybe you can get away with that. But if you start using a lot of that kind of stuff, then it gets really confusing what your abbreviations are, and it just becomes a mess. And it's not worth it. You should have long, explicit names that you just. It may take you a second to type it, but then later on when you're reading it or someone else is reading it, they can actually understand what it means. Here are some bad abbreviations. TT buttons. If I just said TT buttons, you wouldn't have a clue what that meant. What I mean by it is top toolbar buttons. There's no way for you to know that. TT, if you were the one programmed it, then yeah, you'd know it might be TT, but 20 years later, you look at it again, you might not know. And certainly if someone else looks at it, they will not know unless you put comments. And I kind of believe that your comments should be um, made just by your variable names. Like your variable names should be your comments in most cases. And obviously, you're going to need comments in some places at least. But if you name things properly, you don't really need that much commenting because it's already there. Here's another example: dir. You might think directory or direction. If you're talking about maybe physics, you're probably talking about direction. If you're talking about file handling, you're talking about directories. But if you just say dir, then you might be able to figure it out. But what's the point in having to take the extra time to figure out what dir means when it could just say directory or direction? It just makes it a little bit longer, but it makes it more explicit and you can read it faster and know what's going on. And I believe that speed in reading is more important than speed in typing. Casing conventions. Now this can vary. I go with this kind of convention where it's big house, where it starts with the lowercase letter. The rest of the words after that will be uppercase, starting the first letter. But this one's acceptable too, putting an underscore in between. Stupid lines are kind of making that hard to see, but um, I don't really like underscores, so I don't really believe in that one. I only use underscores for very particular situations, and it's very rare for me. But so I'll be talking about as if they're used in this format. It does present, though, if you use this format, it does present issues like with words like power up, where it's like, okay, it's a power up, but is that one word or two words? Because if you think of power up as two words, and it really should be power up. If you think of power up as one word, then it should just be power up as all lowercase. Same thing with file name. Some people might consider that as two words, some people might consider that as one word. And in either case, you're going to have this confusion of what to do. Basically, my general rule of thumb is I don't care if it's even if I write it as one word, I will still uppercase it as if it's two words. It just makes it easier because if you always have a certain rule to follow, then it makes it you don't have to figure out, oh, what should I do. All your names should be explicit. You should have things that say what they are. Program is started. Okay, whoops. So you're telling me that that's a boolean. Obviously, that is a boolean that is then telling me if the program is started. If it's true, the program is started. If it's false, it's not started. That's much better than I'm not even sure what else would be. One key note I want to say here is putting the word is, I think, is important, because program started, um, it definitely does make the brain think a little longer, and also in certain situations, in this one it might be okay, but in other situations it might be not clear what is meant, even though just adding the word is. Like, for instance, even for this next one, if you say current tile in use and you don't use the word is, that definitely sounds like, um, that you might think, oh, that's acceptable, current tile in use. I'm just dropping the word is. Well, in my mind, and actually even in my code, this is actually something I took from my code, the current tile in use, I have that. Current tile in use is the current tile that is in use. So when I say current tile in use, that does not mean that the current tile is in use. And so I think it is very important to say the word is, like in a situation like this where it changes it from being a Boolean to being an object of some other type. Like in this case, the current tile. Selected tile position. So that would be the position of the selected tile. It's explicit. It tells you exactly what it is. I don't have to explain what that means. If I just said cell tile pos, you might be like, what? So having the full name and having it very explicit is important. Selected tile, or tile selected, or selected. Now all of these might get confused on what means what. For selected tile, by what I've been explaining, selected tile should mean the tile that's selected. Tile selected, that is a little bit harder to understand. You might say, okay, it's the tile that's selected, and that might be okay, which is why you should also worry about ambiguity when you're doing this. Selected tile, I believe, is much less ambiguous than tile selected. Now, tile selected could definitely be a Boolean. You could also say maybe it should be tile is selected, but if you just have tile selected, then it gets confusing. You should make sure that you word it properly as well. Order can matter as well. Like selected tile is very clearly the selected tile, but tile selected is not as clear. And then, of course, selected, that one would be better off to be said is selected if it's a Boolean, and selected, what does that even mean? I guess it could be the thing that's selected. It's just better to say more explicit. You want to avoid adjectives. Fast, pleasant, cool. Those are just dumb little adjectives I came up with. But you don't want to really use adjectives for your Boolean, or for your variable names. And you might want to use them as most likely adjectives are going to be they're going to be Booleans. So are you fast? Are you pleasant? Are you cool? Those, that's fine, but it's just better to be more explicit and say is fast, is pleasant, is cool. Then there's no confusion. You don't have to stop and say fast. Oh, is fast. Okay. Because even your brain is going to sit there and figure out that it says is fast, even if it only says fast. Why take the extra half step? Just write it as it is. Okay, so name class variables properly. If you have a car object, don't name your car's position car position, because then when you go to try to reference this object, you're going to say car dot car position. Well, you already know it's a car. You don't need to say it's a car position. So you should just call it position. Same thing with speed or whatever else. You don't say car speed, you just say speed. It just makes things, there's no reason to put an extra step. Think about the class that you're in and just call it position. That's all you need. Explicit function names. Just like with the variable names, you should have explicit function names. If you have this function, add button, you know what it does. Make sprite, you know what it does. you don't have to, even though if you don't know how it works, it doesn't matter. You know what the function does simply based on what the name of it is. It's very explicit. Here's a Boolean returning function. It's explicit. Is program started? Obviously, it's going to return a Boolean that's going to tell you, is program started? You know what I mean? Now, I did mention something earlier about having a variable named is program started, and that's where you might run into a little bit of an issue. Like, oh, you have one named this and one named that, and you're just going to have to work around maybe some stuff like that. But in general, you want to have these things named at least reasonably like this so that you can tell what the function does. Exists is another one, or does exist. It's going to return a Boolean that tells you if it exists. List contains. This is an example of where you're going to have some list going in and some kind of element, and then it's going to tell you that you don't even have to look at the parameters of this. You know these are the parameters because that's what the words say. It says list contains. So I'm going to put in a list and I'm going to put in what I'm looking for to see if it contains it. It's very explicit. You might add to it does list contain, I guess, contain. And that's fine too. The point is that it's explicit what it returns, it's explicit what it takes. You don't even have to look at it. Here's an example that you got Fahrenheit to Celsius. We could call this just 2 Celsius, but is it Kelvin to Celsius? What is it? You know? So it's better to have Fahrenheit to Celsius. Guess what the first parameter is going to be? Fahrenheit. Guess what you're going to be returned? Celsius. This is very clear and doesn't take much explanation to somebody. I don't have to put a comment above it that says, oh, this is a function that takes Fahrenheit and turns it into Celsius. Why do I need to comment that when you can tell from the name? This is something that I run into a lot. I try to reduce the amount of commenting as much as I can. Alright, go buddy. Okay, so here's an example of a bad function name. It's called check value. Okay, so check value is very ambiguous. You have no idea what it does. Okay, so it definitely takes a value and it definitely checks it. What does that mean? Does it return something back? Is it going to return me back a Boolean that says that it was okay? Is it going to go ahead and use that value now to do something? Who knows? It just says check value and you have no idea what that means. Now, although I do preach a lot of this stuff as this is what I do and makes sense, there's always going to be cases that you have some really bad things or you break the rules. For instance, col. Nobody says col. You know, it stands for column, and it's usually accompanied by row, which is why it's kind of okay to use col as a variable name. But yeah, I use col, and there's no reason for that abbreviation, but it does go well with row, and it's always accompanied, so it's always easy to understand. But that is one of the ones that I rule break, probably because I always get confused. Is this how you spell column? Or is this how you spell column? Or is this how you spell column? And honestly, I do realize that I think it's this one, right? I'm not even sure. I'm terrible at spelling. But that's probably one of the reasons why I do that. But you do break rules, and that's okay. The point is that you follow them as much as possible. Here's another bad name. Rename name. That is a terrible name. It is the name that I'm going to rename it to. It's very bad, but that's what it is. Here's another one, is save as file. Now that sounds like it's a file. It's going to save as a file, but it's not. It's actually referring to the function that you might find on, right here. It's actually referring to this, save as. So it's save as file. It's using save as a verb, as a single verb. So you're save asing the file. And that's very much not explicit, and I realize that, and it's a very dumb name, but I just don't care enough to change that. Another one is just left mouse down. It is explicit, but it's stupid. It sounds really stupid, but sometimes you just end up with bad sounding names, but at least you can understand what it is. This is a verb what just happened? What did I just do? I left mouse downed, where downed is pressing down on it. So I just clicked left mouse. So it's still explicit, but it's a dumb name. It really is. Luckily, I don't use it very much, and I don't have very many of these. But I'm just saying that I do also do that. So I hope this was informative. If you're not a professional programmer, but even if you are, maybe this has struck you and made you think, maybe I should change the way that I'm naming things. But obviously nothing is set in stone. There are definitely fundamental things that I think I discussed. Some of it is, there is a few things that might be opinionated, but I think a lot of it should be followed regardless of what your opinion is on every little aspect. But hope this helped.